Shalom Aleichem Chevra. What a treat. Also such a treat to hear Rav David Aaron Shlita, who is like a real architect in our capacity to translate Pnimiyas HaTorah into modern sensibilities. But I'm everything we're going to go through in the sources is going to reflect the same sugya that Rav Aaron was speaking about, which is the paradox of the Tzimtzum, which we began trying to get to 2 weeks ago. I don't know if anyone's holding there, but we'll give a... I assume you guys are holding there, Taka, actually. But we'll do a brief review of that. But I do want to add that listening to Rabbi David Aaron Shlita and understanding in my orientation to that nakuda that he's bringing down, and this is something I was speaking to him about afterwards, and this is not, God forbid, machlokas on any level. I'm not claiming to be of his level.
We want machlokas.
Right, we want sha'ashu da'araisa. But the notion of a steady reunification of opposites to this kind of semblance of a calm, unified dualism, so to say, where both sides are equally giving life to the other side by way of oppositional unity, that there is an added level of the dynamism that ever reminds us, and anybody who listens to my shirim knows that this is the nakuda shahakol amad alav bishvili, is that sense of unity is only unity in relationship to the disunity from whence it's coming. But once you experience that unity, where you include the opposite into itself, what opens up next is the realization that in terms of the actual unity that's to be fathomed, this is still considered disunity, and I have to extend that same process ad infinitum, perpetually growing from disunity back into unity, back to a recognition of a higher level of disunity, always to come to realize the fundamental clause, which is that his unity is greater than our capacity to ever grasp. Kedushasi lemala mekedushaseichem. My holiness, says God, is forever and will forever be separate and apart, ontologically, by way of absolute impossibility of unity, separate and apart from the perfection of the human being. So even when we come to a place of unity, it's never seamless. In spite of the fact that there's a seamlessness to it, there's also a rumbling potential of more. There's a revelation of a tshuka, of a desire to reveal more elokus, which is what happens with Avram Avinu, that yes, Avram Avinu is et halech lefanai ve'eh yatamim. Be whole. Experience the inclusion. See how the cut reveals. See how it's all one and the same. But then what's the next step, as the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says, is he's Yoshev Pesach HaOhel. He's sitting right again at the opening of the gate, which is the recognition, says the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, that when you're masig the Sharnun, which is the inter-inclusion of all of the sevens, what you then come to realize is that, there's another 50 gates, and another 50 gates, and another 50 gates, and another ad infinitum, because we don't know anything, ever. We don't know anything ever, and we can never begin to fathom how great God is, and how big God is, and how unfathomably unified and good God is. But the sense of self and differentiation, which gets re-included into the unity, is meant to serve as an engine. That's the tov ma'od, that's the burning desire to reveal more and more. So there is a dynamism at the heart of this unity, and it's not a self-sameness and an ease. Halavai, maybe that's the opposite of, I'm an anxious person, so maybe I can't imagine that that's real. For me, instead, it's like a, in, out, in, out, in, out, but always going higher and higher. And I think that that's also part of our generation's avodah, is the tnua within the yichud, is the recognition that there's more yichud to be revealed always. It's not about going back to a place of pure unity in the mind, but from a place of pure unity in the mind, realizing that od yoter tov, right? There's a reason od yoter tov is the anthem, because there's more and more goodness. Does that make sense? A lot of this is how I understand Rav Itchemayer's teachings, and Rav Itchemayer is something new that's coming, and it's really connected very much to the Baal HaSulam, actually. The language that Rav Itchemayer uses to push this piece of perpetually making perfection more perfect and adorning perfection is, I used to think it was developed by Rav Itchemayer, and it was really developed by the Baal HaSulam. So the sources that we're going to learn tonight are going to address this cosmic question of the Tzimtzum, of divine contraction. Divine contraction, divine making space. Because without the divine infinitude choosing to make space, there's no place for anything else. And we spoke about how this decision to make space is referred to as the Tzimtzum, as the contraction. As the contraction. A Tzimtzum. And we discussed how this act of space making, of creating a finite space that seems to be the opposite of Hashem's infinite light, so that it can receive His goodness and His light, we discussed a little bit about the two ways in which we can look at this concept of Tzimtzum. On the one hand, there was the perspective that Tzimtzum is a removal, that God contracted His infinite light so as to make space for something other than God, which means that it was full and now it's empty, and then there's a new form of emptiness that comes back in, as we'll see in future shurim with the Kav. But there was fullness, or Ein Sof, then emptiness, Chalal, which creates this notion of, was it literal, was it not literal, because we're looking at this Tzimtzum as a vacuum. God departs in order to make space. But then we spoke of a deeper understanding of the Tzimtzum process, of the contraction of godliness, which is actually the opposite of an emptying out or a removal, but rather a further revelation, a revelation of a potency, of limitation, that always existed within the limitlessness of Hashem. And the Tzimtzum is the decision to reveal constriction. Does this, everybody holding with me in these two tzadim? Yeah.
Does the fullness you mentioned imply that there is an original Kli, and or is the Kli only after
the Gans Metzius is the original Kli. The Tzimtzum is the original Kli. But, I see what you're saying. The Tzimtzum, it's not, it's very good. So you're being mechavein. We spoke 2 weeks ago about what this potential that Hashem is revealing in the shape of existence is. And we said that it was the koach hagvul bebilti gvul, the potential towards limitation that exists within the limitless. Because in order for limitlessness to be truly unlimited, it can't be restricted, and it must be able to maintain limitation as well. But you can't apply limitation, actual limitation, to that which is limitless. So the way we grappled with it is a paradox, which is the potential, the limitless potential of limitation. Like the Baal HaTanya teaches us in different metaphors, is the ray of the sun while it's in the sun itself. The or b'me'or. Or the shalheves hakeshura begacheles, the flame that is contained within the coal. Meaning to say, the potential towards limitation is nullified completely, nullified to the degree that it doesn't even have the name of actual existence by dint of the fact that it's completely subsumed by the infinitude of godliness before the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum, so to say, is a contraction of that unbridled, unlimited nature of infinite light, and what remains, and what comes into focus, rather, is this remainder of a trace that was somehow hidden by way of pure potential, but through the act of this contraction, comes into a state of actualization, almost like something being born. And what's born is this nekuda hapnimis, this innermost point, which is referred to as the chalal hapanui. And so instead of seeing the vacant space as something that was full and now absent, and maybe there's a trace that we can retrieve, but we really have to draw light back down into it. And then we get into this crazy notion that maybe it was even literal, which is just a symptom of the exile of Torah. But we have to reorient ourselves to a place where we see that the Tzimtzum is a gilui. The Tzimtzum is a revelation. It's Hashem revealing Himself in a new way. It's the emergence of this possible dynamism where that which was previously perfect can now somehow become more perfect, because now that there's been the apparent imperfection born, when that gets restored back to original perfection reveals itself to what? Have imperfection within it as well. With me? So we're going to look at these makoros, but with the understanding that ultimately this koach of tzimtzum is something that is generative. It's more and more. Every moment is a tzimtzum, and every moment is an opportunity to reveal more light of Hashem in that place. We're not meant to undo the tzimtzum. In the future, God will reveal how the tzimtzum is Himself. But for us, every ounce of tzimtzum is a kli, a vessel that needs to be utilized to uncover more light of God. Yes, son.
The way I just heard now is that there's no makam to think that it's literal for sure now. Is there a legitimate dale?
That says it?
I don't know anything.
No, other than a letter, and we're not going to get into this too much, other than a letter that was written by the Lubavitcher Rebbe with regards to this conversation. And if it was anybody else, it would be like, okay, like, who cares? But it's Lubavitcher Rebbe, so it's Tzarech Ian. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe makes a real distinction between the perspective of Tzimtzum as it was grasped in the writings of the Baal HaTanya, ultimately, who represented the emergence of the Maggid of Mezrich's school of the light of the Baal Shem Tov. So he was the third generation, which really became the mark of what Hasidus represents. And the opinion of the Vilna Gaon, which ultimately comes about from the sources in the Vilna Gaon from his Perish on Safed Tzniusa, because it's not from the Talmidim of the Vilna Gaon. The Nefesh HaChaim does not say the Nefesh HaChaim. So before, meaning. So the question is, the implication is, absolutely. I just want to give a little bit of context to this point. The implication is, and I'm okay. Everyone okay with this detour from some history of the Tzimtzum, because the history of the Tzimtzum is also how to learn the sugi of the Tzimtzum. The Vilna Gaon speaks of Tzimtzum in a literal way. But that's not meant to express the limitation of godliness from existence. It just means that it's literal in the sense that what? It was a revelation. Tzimtzum is real because Hashem reveals himself even more with the Tzimtzum. What we just described, the second level of Tzimtzum, where Tzimtzum is a further revelation of God, so then you could say it's literal because God could always reveal himself more. But the notion that Tzimtzum is a contraction and a vacancy of godliness, and the application of that opinion that Tzimtzum is kapshuto from that level becomes problematic with regards to all of the opinions. And this is exactly what the Leshem says. I don't bring this makor here, but the Leshem says that with regards to the Tzimtzum, of course it's literal. It's literal in the sense that everything in the Arizal is literal, but we don't know how it's literal. We don't know what literal means in the realms of Atzilut. So we can say that it's literal because what's the Tzimtzum? It's the revelation of a concealing power from within God himself, so to say. Or the mashal, the metaphor that Chazal already used to convey this, which is that the original Tzimtzum, and Rabbi Nachman hints to this in his teaching on Tzimtzum, is that the paradox of Tzimtzum is the paradox of the locust whose exoskeleton is emergent from within itself. Kahaden kamsa de levushe mineyube. Because on the one hand you have the locust, and the locust has an inside that needs to be protected. And in order to place protection upon something that's interior, you need to add something that's exterior. But with the locust, the externality is actually emergent from within the interiority itself. So that which is concealing its inside is also part and parcel of its inside, but in a new, hitherto unrevealed way. So that you can't even claim that the external shell of the locust is different than the locust because it's revelatory of the locust. And that becomes a metaphor for how we understand Tzimtzum. That God's unfolding, so to say, is in and of itself the concealment that allows for his revelation to now express itself in limitation itself.
Can you both say it again, like really like dumb English?
No, because I think you totally understood what I said.
I really didn't.
Is there you don't understand Gans Alt, or you have a question on it?
The Chagam part, the grasshopper.
No, really the two versions.
Oh, from the beginning.
And if there's nafkamina, I was going to,
Vada, there's a nafkamina.
Nafkamina gedola,
Vada, how I live.
You do everything.
How I live.
Because the misnag did to that it's kipshuto, so it's kipshuto.
What's the nafkamina?
The whole day that happened is לא נכון.
What does kipshuto mean?
Okay, so we're saying, so I have to decide right now where I want the conversation to go. Because I'm the captain now. I'm joking. But I think that let's read the sources inside without being complicated by the history of the reception of the idea. And let's try and study the idea itself, because a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, which is the point of the exile of Torah. It unfolds by way of confusion. So my Rebbe of Moshe Shatz, who should live and be well and have a complete refuah shalema, stresses that the whole thing is a deliberate misunderstanding so that we nowadays can show how the Leshem and the Mittler Rebbe, who wouldn't even have looked at each other in their time, are going to be revealed to be saying the same exact thing. And that's the avodah. Yeah.
Question that
Do I believe that?
I know you really think the Nefesh HaChaim would believe what you, no,
In terms of Tzimtzum?
His whole Indian was to argue with him. That's like
I want to just on this point of the Nefesh HaChaim, and I've studied a lot of the Nefesh HaChaim, and also I think everybody should read Nefesh HaTzimtzum from a very special Jew, forgetting his name right now, who translated it, and it's a full-on discussion of this entire sugya, in a very clarified and real way. But the Nefesh HaChaim does not say anywhere that Tzimtzum is to be taken kipshuto. He identifies Tzimtzum as the contraction of godliness for the sake of revelation. The issue that the Nefesh HaChaim has with the tfisa, the grasp of that Tzimtzum lo kipshuto that Hasidus was promoting, was that with this notion of pure expression of godliness, there were going to be a number of issues that took shape. And the way that he described the issues were kind of hidden. But one was that if you contemplate divine unity so much, then you're going to come to worship God in mekomos hametunafos, meaning to say a euphemism for just going beyond the line. And there was real, as Rav David Aaron said, we have to thank Hashem for his nagdus, because the Vilna Gaon is a fundamental. You can't take the Gra out of the process of Mashiach. The Torah of the Vilna Gaon is as fundamental to the story as the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. You just have to learn the Torah of the Vilna Gaon through the lens of the Baal Shem Tov, which is Eretz Yisrael. The Gra didn't come to Eretz Yisrael. Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov, the third Talmidim of the Gra, came to Eretz Yisrael, and they made peace and shalom to the degree that the Divrei Chaim of Tzanz, who was an heir of Hasidic majesty, had on his desk the Perush on the Idrazuta of Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov called Mayim Adirim. Why? Because there's a teaching in there that says that Hashem cries out from Har Chorev every day, calling us to return. But where? Where do we hear this? And so the answer is we hear it in the heartstrings and the desire to, our good thoughts are those voices that come from Hashem, meaning our desire to return comes from Hashem also. Now this teaching was given over by Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov and by Rav Menachem Mendel Vitebsker, a Talmud of the Gra and a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. And both of them ultimately arrived in the Aliyah HaRishona in Tiberia, where Rav Yisrael Shklov is buried. Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov made it to Yerushalayim, where he redeemed the Churva synagogue from the Proto-Sabbateans and rebuilt the temple in his mind. And not in his mind, the Mitziyut. But they loved each other. There was yichud there. So there was a real cause for concern at the nascent stages of Hasidus, and people were really doing somersaults in the street. And so the Nefesh HaChaim was stressing the danger of contemplating divine unity at all times. Because what the Tanya seems to be revealing is that Yichud Ilah, which is the recognition that Tzimtzum is Eina Kipshuto, and that godliness is revealed everywhere, and that there's really no constriction. So then a person is going to come to worship God in the places of impurity in the Nefesh HaChaims that were printed in Bnei Brak from Rav Reuben, who was the Talei Oros, who passed away. He was a big tzaddik. He passed away young. And he adds a footnote there to look at Rav Dessler. And what Rav Dessler says over there, he has a whole teaching where he says, what's the problem with worshiping God in the bathroom? It's not that God is not in the bathroom. Of course God is in the bathroom. There's no place devoid of godliness. It's that halacha dictates that it is forbidden to contemplate God in the bathroom. And so the entire concern was, how do we limit this exposure to Yichud Ilah in the hopes of maintaining the posture of Yichud Tata? You with me on this point so far? Rav Soloveitchik has a svara when it comes to tefillah, and Rav Itchemeyer uses the same svara when it comes to this machlokas, about when to contemplate Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata. Because the Nefesh HaChaim is saying you're not allowed to contemplate this other than in Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, or in times of utter distress. And haraya, there's a segula if you say Ein Od Milvado with the proper intention, and you truly come to a place of bittul b'metzias, and you come to realize that nothing is anything but the revelation of godliness and infinite light, then there's absolutely nothing that can harm you. And the story goes that when the Heilige Brisker Rav was escaping from the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, he held this in mind, and he was able to walk by Nazis. These are the Sipor Maisios. And so Yichud Ilah is a powerful, real thing. The question is, how available should it be? Tanya in Shar Yichud V'Amunah says this is the basic reality that one should contemplate And then when the Lubavitcher Rebbe finally concretizes and crystallizes what the whole movement was about, he says, you have to contemplate this at Moda'ani. Every child has to contemplate this. So what's the machlokas? So when it comes to the biblical character of tefillah, of prayer, so there's a machlokas between the Rambam and the Ramban, between Nachmanides and Nachmanides and Maimonides. And Maimonides says that tefillah is mid'oraisa. It is mid'oraisa. It is mid'oraisa. And the Ramban says that tefillah is only mid'oraisa. It's only of biblical import in times of suffering, in times of tsar and pain. And so the machlokas is that one, the Rambam says that tefillah is a biblical command, and the Ramban says it's only a biblical command when there's suffering or difficulty. Says Rav Soloveitchik that the Rambam and the Ramban are not truly arguing. The Rambam is just Lishitaso and Mor Nevuchim and everywhere else that to be a human being in this world is to already be living in a shas tzara, is to already be living in a place of a chalal hapanu, which is the koyach of chilul, which is the late sunness of Amalek, as Rav Hutner points out, which is just the negation of meaning. Once you're in Metzius, then you have the possibility of being machalalit. That's the problem with the halal. It appears that it's devoid, and if it's devoid, it's a dead body already. It's a halal. Right? So the Rambam, who feels that every moment of existence is this reality where I have to beg Hashem for mercy to allow my soul to taste the true light of infinite secrets instead of being stuck in the chomer of this guf, so then every moment as a human being has to be tefillah. And it's d'oraisa at all the times. He doesn't disagree. The true power of tefillah is when it comes about by way of tsar. That's what makes it d'oraisa. But life is this place.
It's like Cook says in the beginning of the Raya,
Yeah, Avada. Avada, it's exactly like this. But it's that seen through the lens of Ishbitz and Radzin, which says that, Nimnu V'Gamru, we were talking about Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel before, right? So they decide, and somehow this makes its way into liturgy on Yom Kippurim. That the wise ones, the sages, spent 3.5 years. 3.5, Rav Tzadok says, is Chachma, Bina, and Das, depending on whether you take the Chasadim of Das or the Gvuros of Das. The severity of Das goes to Beis Shammai, and the Gvuros and the Chasadim of Das go to Beis Hillel. That's Shlosh Hashanim v'Mechsa Nechleku. That they all have Moichin, but the question is, what's the Hachra'ah? Yeah, so Rav Tzadok's amazing. But Noyach lo la'adam shalei nivra yoter mishanivra. Chazal announced that it would have been more pleasant and more pleasing for a person to have not been created than to have been created, which is seemingly a pretty despondent, assumption about reality. And what the Meshiloach teaches us is that we have to pay attention to the words of Chazal. And Chazal don't say mutav. Chazal don't say mutav shelo nivra yoter mishanivra. Chazal don't say it would have been better to have not been created. They simply say it would have been simpler and less difficult.
What's the lesson?
Noach lo la'adam shelo nivra yoter mishanivra. It's more pleasant for an individual. But the Meshilach says what we must confirm and affirm at every moment is the certainty of goodness. So again, this world is that makom tzara, right? It's a derech. And so the Rebbe says about this machlokas, Rav Yitzchak says about this machlokas, no one's disagreeing. Yichud ilah is what must be contemplated when a person feels that they're in a state of emergency. When there's no holds barred, I have to directly run up to the recognition that God never left, and all of existence is but an appearance, a real appearance, but an appearance nonetheless. The only difference is, how do you view Metzias? If you view Metzias through the lens of the Baal Shem Tov, any moment of being disconnected from God is already the biggest Yerida imaginable. As the Baal Shem Tov says already in Savas HaRivash, that the sin is to not think about God. And for the world of Lithuania, for the Derech HaGra, it wasn't. There was a saving grace. There was something that one can hold on to. And you touched upon this before. There was Torah. There was a love of Torah that was able to protect the person at all costs, and you didn't have to contemplate Yichud Ilah. Torah was Yichud Tata. If you learn Torah enough, then the Ma'or Sheba Yachzer Lo Lemutav, you experience Or Ein Sof itself. Because if you look in the Nefesh HaChaim's description of what Torah actually is, in Shar Daled, he describes it in how we're describing it. It's the revelation of God. It's the Tzimtzum of God. Hashem was mitzamtzim himself into what? Into Osios. Into Osios. Into the Torah itself. Everybody with me on this Nakuda? So let's look at how we're going to understand Tzimtzum. I want to read from the bottom paragraph of this beautiful Zohar Chadash, Daf Yud Tes Amud Beis. It reads like a medrash. Reads like a medrash. We're going to start with Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar David. And to pause on the importance of the Chavraya Kadisha and the names. Rabbi Yitzchak is Gevura. Yitzchak is the schok of Yitzchak. It's the ability to realize how constriction ultimately leads to more light. The Akedah, Yitzchak is Gevura, Yitzchak is Din, Yitzchak is constriction itself. And Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, so Rabbi Yitzchak is now teaching us about David. He's giving us a teaching about David. So when the Zohar Kadosh is telling us who's giving us a teaching, we have to darshan the names. And so Rabbi Yitzchak is saying we're entering into the sugya of Tzimtzum right now. We're entering into the sugya of Tzimtzum. My sugya, says Rabbi Yitzchak, that's my name. And in order to properly understand this sugya of Tzimtzum, we have to start with David HaMelech. Why? What's David? David is Malchus. David is the Nekuda HaPanimi that's revealed through the Tzimtzum. So this Amar of Yitzchak, Amar David already contains the whole teaching within it. David says as follows, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, Master of concealment. Eidus sha'asisi b'ma'aseh bereishis hina emes. I testified to the truth of this world. L'hayed aleim b'chol yom. I've done that, I've proclaimed your glory. Dahat taninan, for it's already been taught, Kol hameid b'ma'aseh bereishis b'chol yom. Someone who testifies to the reality that God created the world, something from nothing, each and every day. Muftach lushu ben olam haba. That it's certain that they're going to experience olam haba. V'amar David, and furthermore David says, Atahu sha'asita es kol ha'olam. Hashem, you're the one who created the world. You created the world how? Through Tzimtzum. V'asisa es hamayim, and you created the waters. V'hamayim hayu machasim et ha'olam mehariboy shabahem. And the waters were covering over and inundating the entirety of existence as a result of their measure. And you've caused it so that they should all gather together by way of tzimtzum, contract into themselves, all of it into one particular place. So too it should be awoken from within your will, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that your Shechina, your presence, or Ein Sof, which fills the entire world, contracted into your home. It's better for you to reveal yourself there. And so this teaching, what's incredible is that in the Arizal and Rav Chaim Vital, we find that what existed before the creation of the world was Or Ein Sof, endless light. And we have a reason that light is used as the metaphor, because light is the most refined of all physical entities, as Ramchal and the Gra point out. It's something that's the least something available. But there's a previous metaphor used in the Sefer Ma'ayan Chachma, and it's also brought down in the Arizal in Shar HaKlalim, so it makes its way into Eitz Chaim itself, which is that prior to the creation of the world, it was not Or Ein Sof, it was Mei Ein Sof. Mei Ein Sof. It was endless waters, because water represents that tohu vavohu, that power, that force. Like we say in Tehillim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself in the waters, that forceful nature of Mayim b'Mayim. And in fact, when the Gra is really giving us his understanding of Tzimtzum and Safed Tzniusa, he utilizes it the second day of creation, Vayimavdil b'Mayim l'Mayim, that the true force of the Tzimtzum is that it separates upper waters and lower waters. Mayim Tachtoinim is the Yichud Tata, and Mayim Elyonim is the Yichud Ilah. That the upper waters represent divine unity without any separation, and the lower waters represent the apparent constriction of divine unity in this world. And so these waters are now mitzumsam into one place. So again, what I'm trying to show is how the story of the Tzimtzum is the revelation of an innermost point that contains everything. And we'll see what the Totza'ah is and what the Tachlis of all of this is. So let's look in the Arizal in Eitz Chaim Kadisha. So as we're going to see, the Arizal really takes shape in two different ways. The Arizal had two Talmidim. One was the main Talmud, who remains the main Talmud, but there was another Talmud who also is the main Talmud. He's just not the main Talmud. And our job is to unify the main Talmud with the other main Talmud and to show how they're both giving us two expressions of Rabbeinu HaArizal. When the Arizal arrived, and Bezras Hashem will bring on the history of the Arizal, the whole story of these tzaddikim and the way they came to teach and learn Torah, and the books they wrote, and the names of the books that they wrote, and the numbers of chapters, are all reflective of the content that they're teaching as well. There's nothing by chance. But the first student that we have is Rav Chaim Vital. And everything is Rav Chaim Vital. Rav Chaim Vital gives us the Shmona Sha'arim. Ultimately, right, there's a lot that can be said about how they were developed. But what we refer to as Kitvei HaArizal, as we know it, Eitz Chaim Kadisha, Otzrat Chaim, what we have is the writings of Rachu, Rav Chaim Vital. And Rav Chaim Vital's understanding of the Tzimtzum, like we said, is that first understanding. The way he teaches it to us is that there was a fullness of light, and then Hashem removed that light, and he left the Chalal HaPanui, and then that Chalal HaPanui gets re-inundated with infinite light by way of the Kav or Ein Sof, which again gives rise to that mistaken possibility that God actually left the scene, which would somehow result in some spooky action at a distance type of Ratzon Hashem that continues to have its attachments to reality while being transcendent, God forbid. And Rav Chaim Vital, look, Rav Chaim Vital was not saying anything other than the other Talmidim as well, but Rav Chaim Vital was giving us what we needed to receive. And we're going to see in Eitz Chaim, when it talks about Tzimtzum, it's this picture of an emptiness. And that's going to be the first stance that we have. So let's look at the language in Eitz Chaim Kadisha. Ka'asher Allah b'retzona ha'pashut l'vroa ha'olamus laha'atzil ha'ne'etzalim lahotzi la'or shleimus pu'ulosav v'shemosav v'kinuyav asher zosi siba brias ha'olamus k'mevur etzlinu banaf aleph b'chakir rishona. When it arose in his simple will to create the worlds, again, I'm going to be mitzamsim and focus on the bolded letters. To create the world of Atzilus, which is the main place in which Hashem reveals Himself, and then to allow the next unfolding process of Pu'ulosav, Shemosav, Vikinuyav, which represent the three worlds of separation, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. The entire purpose of God's creation, as it arose in His unfathomable will, is so that Hashem should be able to reveal the fullness of His potential, His pu'ulosav, what He's able to do, v'shemosav, and His names, v'kinuyav, and the appellations that will be applied to Him, all of the different shemos hakadoshim, the asara shemos she'enon nimchakim. That was the purpose. And in order to effectuate such a thing, in order to enable His glory to emerge outwards, there obviously has to be otherness to receive that glory. In Melech B'lo Am. There's no king without a nation. And therefore, Hine az tzamsem es atzmo ein sof b'nekuda ha'emtza'it asher bo be'emtza oro mamish. And so what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did was He contracted Himself in the innermost point that existed literally in the middle of His light. These parentheses are fundamentally important when it comes to any conversation about Tzimtzum, and it's why I confidently said that there's no such thing as Tzimtzum Kipshuto. Amar Meir, that's Rav Meir Poparash, who gave us the Kitvei HaArizal, Be'archenu Amar Harav Ze V'kal Lahaven. This is only Mitzidenu. Be'archenu means from our relative orientation. That language in Chasidus Chabad as well as in Nefesh HaChaim becomes the language of Mitzidenu, from our perspective. We're only talking about our perspective. We're never talking about the perspective of godliness. Even Tzimtzum Eina Kipshuto is our perspective. Even the notion that God never contracted Himself is our perspective. Because in truth, God's perspective, we have no idea. It has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with the world. It gives life to the world. So what happens is, V'tzamsem ha'or ha'hu v'nesrachik el tzadei svivo sanekuda ha'emsa'is. So Hashem contracted the light, and it distanced itself, and it retreated to the sides, as if to surround that innermost point, which is theoretically now vacant. V'az nishar makom panui, and what remains is a vacant space, v'avir, air, v'chalal rekani, and an empty void. Minikuda emtsa'is mamish kazeh. In the innermost point, and then in the Eitz Chaim Kadisha, what you have is a picture, a circle, and then an innermost dot in it, as everyone has seen likely. And we'll just look for on the innermost point. So this is the Shaila I'll come back to in a second. But let's just look, for the sake of getting to all of the Makoros, let's look at the highlighted part. V'hine achar tzimtzum hanizka la'el. After this tzimtzum, as nishar makom hachalal va'avir panui v'rekani. Actually, you know what? Let's read the words inside. V'hine hatzimtzum hazeh, this contraction, haya b'hashva achas b'svivos hanekuda ha'emsa'it rekanit hahu. That the contraction to the sides, almost like a pebble that's thrown into water, where the equicentric or the concentric circles, as they retreat outwards from the point of impact, and those concentric circles are all equidistant to each other. They're all fundamentally surrounding that innermost point that is now empty. Ba'ofen shemakom hachalal hahu, that the place of that empty space, that void, Haya igul mikol svivosov, it was surrounded on all of its sides, bahashva'a gemura, with total equality. It was a circle, not a square, not a triangle, because a circle enables this utter inundation of equality, where each point is equidistant to the center. Vasiba haisa, and the reason for this, lefisha kivan she'or ein sof, or ha'ein sof, shav bahashva'a gemura, that because the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is fundamentally unified and equal in all places, the all-encompassing, all-saturation related to the revelation of infinite light means that there's no tzad, there's no sidedness, there's no part that's not the center.
If it's a square.
The Meforshim explain it geometrically speaking. I won't be able to explain it in any intelligible way. But the Meforshim and all of the Meforshim on the Eitz Chaim go to great lengths to understand kind of why not a square. And then it leads us to a secret that the Zohar HaKadosh refers to as the circle within the square and the square within the circle. So the fact that a square could have been theoretically plausible is a real mahalich and a derech and a sugya, a muka. But I don't have enough of the broadband to kind of like dip down in there. Right, that nothing, there's no ego, there's no square in Mitziut.
If you could make a real square.
Right. Rav Elia Weintraub lived with this klal, that everything is igul. But again, we see the maturity of differentiation in lines and shape takes place afterwards. This can be seen as the original igulim, meaning this is more of the immature stage of revelation. This is before Havaya reveals itself. This is Shem Kel Shakai, that only Avram Avinu received. This is not the Torah yet. The Kav is the Torah. Yeah?
Yeah.
Everybody with me? Beseder. So the Tzimtzum had to be equal, because the light that surrounded it was equal. And then he adds over here Mahadura Basra. Mahadura Basra. This is an interesting addendum in the textual history, because we're not quite sure where this necessarily comes from, and it's going to answer up your question of why in the image that they printed in the Eitz Chaim's, it's a picture of a circle with a dot in the middle, and why some people thought that dot in the middle was a Tohu Sofrim, that it wasn't meant to be included. So the textual history of how this came down to us reflects the very way in which the ideas came down to us as well. In the Madura Basra it says, Inyan HaTzimtzum Hazeh, what is this Inyan of Tzimtzum? This emptying out, so as to make space. Inyan hatzimtzum hazeh hu legalot shoresh hadinim kedei latet midat hadin achar kach be'olamos. The purpose of this tzimtzum was so that the shoresh of dinim, which ultimately in its most abstract root is gvul, the koyach gvul, the shoresh of the din, in infinitude itself, yeah? We're not talking about something that's separate from God. The shoresh of the dinim all the way up, which is the possibility of vessels, was already, or I shouldn't add my interpretation to it, let's read the words. Hu legalo shoresh hadinim, it's to reveal the root of judgments, kedei latet midat hadin, in order so that midat hadin and measure and limitation and boundedness and boundary and numbers should come into mitziut. Achar kach be'olamot, in the worlds, to give shape to the worlds. The koach hahu, and what was the strength in the shorashei hadinim? It's referred to from the Zohar HaKadosh as the butzina de kardenusa, which we read in the earlier Zohar. Bereish hamenusa de malka galif gilufa betiru ilah nafak butzina de kardenusa. Bego hayavira. And this Butzina de Kadnus, I have to say, the first sefer I ever wrote in 2014 was called Tzchoik de Yitzchak. It was a likut. I was living in Queens. It was a compilation of this sugya. It's called Chelek Butzina de Kadnusa. And it's a compilation of all of the sources from the Gra, not all, but the Gra, the Baal Shem Tov, Rashash, Ramchal. Because this sugya obsessed me until I came to Eretz Yisrael. Because this is still just the sugya of the dinim. Something much higher than the shorish of din, which is the chesed and the goodness that really comes about. This is not the beginning. This is just how we get to the true beginning, which is goodness. Butzina de Kardenusa is referred to as, Butzina is a flame, the Kardenusa is interpreted by the Meforshim as darkness. But we find also in Maseches Psachim, in the first perek, with regards to matzah that's made mechite de Kardenusa, which, bless you, which represented a certain hard type of wheat, which also has, you know what perek that's found in? That sugya is found in Or La'arba Asar, the secret of how nighttime is called light, because in truth the Tzimtzum is a revelation. But Butzina de Kardenusa is a dark flame. It's the shoresh of Midah. It's a Midah that's not a Midah. You'll find in the Zohar Kadosh all the time in this playful poetic of Midah she'eno Midah, a limit that's not a limit. The Butzina de Kardenusa is, like we explained, it's this initial emergence of a darkened light that is negated completely in the light of the infinite. But then as it emerges, it takes shape in the dinim.
Does this explain the Nekuda in the circle?
That Mahadura Basra, well, let me just finish this and then we'll come back to that Mahadura Basra parentheses. Tzimtzum hanal asher az nishar makom chalal va'avir panui v'rekani be'emsa ha'or ha'in sof mamish. And going back to the Tzimtzum of Rav Chu that he was talking about before that parentheses, so there's an empty space here. So in this Mahadura Basra, the implication is that the Tzimtzum was to reveal something, to allow the Shoresh Hadinim to emerge rather than to empty something out completely. Now, if we're learning it that it's to empty something out completely, then it doesn't make sense that there would be a dot in the middle of the circle. All that would make sense would be a circle. It was an empty circle. Hashem moved the light away from the inner point and it remained like a circle, like an eagle. But the notion of the innermost point is that what emerged into that innermost place was the Nekuda HaPnimis, which was the Koyach HaGvul, which means fundamentally that all of limitation is a furthering of God's revelation. Do you see what we're saying here? Yeah, Tzav.
Essentially, in some ways, what might be a Tal Sofer is actually the circle around rather than the dot. The circle, which is written in darkness, really it's just light that surrounds the inner
Yeah.
which was revealed from...
The added circle, right. I like
I mean, in some
I
ways
like it.
just-
Yeah, no, that's
just being in
the...
dot, that's-
What
But-
is it revealing exactly?
What's it revealing? It's revealing the incomprehensible power of God to reveal himself by way of his opposite, like Rabbi David Aaron was revealing. It's to reveal Yichud by way of what appears to be Pirud. For there to be otherness, but for that otherness to ultimately be shown to just be another revelation of God's unity. It's not separate and apart. We're not meant to come to draw God back into Metziut. We're meant to reveal God in Metziut. And the engine that does that, the Ikar Makom of the Tzimtzum, is in our minds. The Eitz Chaim Kadisha, what the Arizal was trying to do for us was to give us the Eitz Chaim. To give us the Eitz Chaim, to help us taste from the Eitz Chaim again.
I was using colors, kivyachol. This is all kivyachol.
Yeah.
So around the circle, that let's say the color.
We don't have to say Kivyachol because it's Or Ein Sof. We're not talking about Ein
So
Sof.
let's say around the circle, in the pictures there's just a circle, but around
Yeah.
the circle there's the color yellow for all. And so
Mm-hmm.
now the inner circle, what color is that? That's black or yellow?
You're saying good only because for this we have to go back, meaning the Or Ein Sof that Hashem needed to remove is also a revelation.
Sorry, I wasn't focused again. Do that again.
The Or Ein Sof that Hashem needed to remove
Yeah.
so that measure could emerge, that's also a revelation. That's not Hashem himself. And so that light also, comparatively to the extension beyond it, is also going to be considered the Nekudas HaTzimtzum. Does that make sense? I don't know if I fully understand the question then.
When it was just a circle, it was kilu or in sof, and then there was empty. Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. The chalal. When you say there's a nekuda inside, which is shorosh adinim, I can't understand if that shosh dinim is that halal panui or not. What I mean
It's referred to, it is the halal hapanu.
that is a halal panui.
It is, because as we're going to see, there was this random added word, seemingly, that Rahu added to this nature of avir, air. Air doesn't sound so much like a vacuum, it sounds more like a fullness of sorts.
Yeah.
So the halal panui is another way of being identified as mitziyut. Mitziyut is the halal
That's
panui,
that nekuda.
which is why, yeah, we are the nikuda. We're the innermost point of the bays. That's
So
us.
What's the space around, the empty space around the nekuda is the halal panui around the halal
It's
panui?
makifim, it's everything
What
else
makifim?
that's going on other than our own moichin at this present moment. It's mitziyut, it's the hustle and bustle of the igulim, of the noise of mitziyut. Tzimtzum is a rikuz hanekuda, right?
Yeah.
And so, everybody with me? What time is it? We're good time-wise? Okay.
Then can I take a proposal that essentially
Mm-hmm.
the choshech al pnei tehom
Mm-hmm.
makes sense that it's not created because the choshech al pnei tehom is the aspect of being
Yeah.
that existed
Yeah.
prior to Hashem
Yeah. Yeah.
reinstilling life
Yeah.
into that
Yeah.
relation of dark.
The haaretz haita tohu vavohu. The Sefer HaBahir already asks, which is theoretically the most pre-original Kabbalistic text that we have. Why are we saying haita? If this is the instantiation of being, and this is the beginning point, then why are we referring to it in past tense? You find the reflection in this in the Akedah, Vahi acharei hadvar ma'ile. After what? Nothing happened. Ad kedei kach that Rashi is not even sure what happened. It just is afterwardness. And so the Zohar HaKadosh says, Haita mekadmat dana, from beforehand, that what we see as reality is what we're trying to describe is the furthering of divine revelation, so that the emergence of existence by way of the Shiva Yemei Bereshis and the 6 days of creation all represent different contraction valves that God revealed himself through down to the innermost point of it all, which is the innermost point of the innermost point, which is this low place, the Dir B'Tachton Mamish, us, this place. That's the innermost point. Down here, and it's revealed. We were Nishmas Yisrael was Koydem Ha'olam. The entire thing that drove Hashem's desire to be mitzamtzim himself in the get-go was to reveal the capacity of human beings refining this world. That's the Iker drive. That's the Iker drive, at least as far as we know it. The truthful inner drive is L'ma'eni asa. That Hashem does this for himself, and he should finish it already and bring about the tikkun. That was already something that was revealed through the Baal Shem Tov, that we don't even have to make reasons anymore. Hashem, reveal yourself. That becomes the call and the demand. B'kitzur, let's go a little bit weiter. So again, this ta'osofer of the innermost point in this circle makes sense if we're learning it as the revelation of Tzimtzum as a pre-existent, so to say, capacity of measure. This is the same reason, what's the nafkamina here? If I need to make a bracha, right, if I need to make a bracha on a cup of water and I don't have a yarmulke on, can I cover my own head and make a bracha with my hand? I can't, right? Because a person is not a mechitza to themselves. A person can't be considered a mechitza to themselves. A part of something is not considered a mechitza on another part of itself. And so with that logic being said, if the entirety of Tzimtzum is God covering himself, then it's not really considered a concealment. Which means then, like the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh teaches us, which is inherent deep within the writings of the Gra as well, that in truth the entirety of this worldliness is, by way of metaphor, like a king who wanted to test the love of his son. And around his palace he set up partitions upon partitions, terrifying partitions, frightening partitions, division upon division. And there was a call to all of the warriors to see who could break through all of these concealments and each of these fears. And each person tried, and they came and they left, and they couldn't make it. But the son, knowing who his father truly was able to walk through the partitions because he knew that they were ultimately achizas ha'enayim. They were trickery of the eye. And he was able to run directly into the palace and encounter his father again. This perspective gives us avodah begashmias. This perspective gives us chasidus. This perspective gives us the capacity to be functional Jews that are outside of a Beis Medrash setting. This perspective of Tzimtzum being a revelation of God is a fundamentally new way in how to cope with the symptoms that we experience, which are ultimately, more often than not, as a result of the sense of concealment from God. I'm not talking about diagnostics, but the anger, the frustration, the impatience, the fear, the anxiety. Right? Most of this is rooted in the sense that there is an absence of godliness, because absence is the opposite of presence. This perspective of the Tzimtzum is a radical shift in consciousness that teaches us that, wait a second, all along I've been thinking of absence as the lack of presence, and what Kabbalah is teaching me ultimately is that I've had it all wrong. Absence is the presence of absence. It's Hashem revealing himself by way of absence, meaning to say the absence is no different than the revelation. In fact, there is a far deeper potency in the work that we do in the depths of apparent concealment, because that's where we have to utilize all of our kishkas and our efforts, which goes even further than ever imagined to prove how truly great God is. Because if I can find him here, in this mind, in this heart, in this body, in a tzimtzum like this, then where can he not be found? And so it has a radical nafkamina in terms of how a person functions in this world on a daily basis. What's a traffic jam? What does it mean to overcome anger? Should I really be getting angry in this circumstance, but I've worked on my midah of not getting angry and therefore I'm a bal musar and I've been able to collapse that impulse? Or is there a deeper level of coming to terms with the fact that, wait a second, if this is what's taking place in my life and God is not truly concealed, then it's my responsibility to search out that point of godliness in this moment, just as I would in a moment of clarity or dvekus. So you see how it has a practical impact.
To go back to the mashal,
Mm-hmm.
he walks through the barriers.
He walks through the barriers. Yeah,
He's not interested in the
Where
barriers.
should you dash it out?
the barriers. We know what the barriers are. Halavai, we've been through enough real barriers that there should be no more real barriers anymore. Rachamim Rabbim. We know what the real barriers feel like. But Nishmas Yisrael survives. It doesn't mean the barriers. The king is not making. It's not holographic. We can't deny the reality of this world. The Baal Tanya says it is forbidden to say, Tzimtzum and Kapshuto, existence doesn't exist. Well, you just denied the entirety of the Torah. Existence most certainly exists. It just doesn't exist by way of what we understand existence to be. It's like the Rambam describes as an existence that's not really an existence. It's a real fake thing that ultimately will be revealed to have been null and void, which is kol hara'i lebila ein bila ma'akeves bo. The Svarim Menachos, that if something needs to have the quality of bila, of mixture, in order to be considered kosher for Menachos, it doesn't necessarily need that action done. All it needs is the possibility of it being done to be considered as if it's done. Or why we can't use a lulav asherah. Because kasuse mechta shiura, that there's no existence to it. It exists. No, there's no existence. Torah says there's no existence. The Rebbe Maharash proves this point. So it's non-existent, but it's also existent. It's existent, but we know it's non-existent. Why? Because it stands at the ready to be revealed at any moment that, Mashiach comes to show, it wasn't really Metzias. And as long as I know that there's always the chance that it's going to be revealed that it's not Metzias, I don't take Metzias so seriously. Maharash says that if I make a neder on something that was created by way of kishuf, am I chayev in that? And the answer is yes. And the Rebbe Maharash says, see, Metzias is real. Even if it's not really real, it's real. Something made by Kishuv is also real. So the barriers are fundamentally real. And Kabbalah doesn't necessarily give us the insight as to how to move through those barriers. As I understand it, the Kabbalah of the Arizal was a gift given to us as a result of being profoundly traumatized by barriers. And every time there's a traumatization of Klal Yisrael, there's an added gift that comes out. After the cave comes the Zohar HaKadosh. After Gerish Sfard comes the Arizal, the Giluyim of the Arizal. And then only after Shabtai Tzvi do we get the Giluyim of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh and the Gra, who give us real practiced principles as to how to actually deal with the barriers. Kamarna has its own way of dealing with the barriers. Breslov has its own way, Chabad has its own way, Piazetzna has its own way, Gur has its own way, Polish Hasidus has its own way. The Rashash has his own way, the Talmidim of the Rashash. Look, this is how my bias is, that after the Giluyim of the Ari is the Nahar HaYotzim Eden, he's the river that flows forth from Gan Eden. And then it's Yispardu LaArba Roshim, and those Arba Roshim are the Rashash, the Baal Shem Tov, the Vilna Gaon, and the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal HaSulam wedges himself in between the Ramchal, the Gra, and the Baal Shem Tov, and the Rashash, actually. But they're the ones who are... We can look at the history of the development of Pnimiyas HaTorah as the history of the development of medicine. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu drew down medicine from heaven. And the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh came and said, well, there has to be a revelation of this medicine because at least a pocket of this energy will ensure that the Torah is not forgotten. Because you have to reveal this medicine. And the Arizal came along and said, okay, well, the medicine is good, but we have to figure out how to manufacture it, right? How do other people get to experience it? Because the Arizal sat 12 years on the Nile River being mitboded for a week's long and learning Sisrei Torah with Eliyahu Hanavi. Not everybody could be the Arizal. So the Arizal modernized, so to say, and systematized the process. And then that was the manufacturing plant. And then from there comes 4 different kind of routes of like pharmacological development. Hasidus, Gra, and each and every tzaddik is their own tincture, its own medicine for a different issue that the neshama feels in this world. Yeah?
And the Arboration, where does Rav Kook fit in? Kabbalah? Is he like
He's
a
everything.
different entity,
No,
or-
he's everything. In terms of Kabbalah, he's a student of the Vilna Gaon, that's clear. Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver, the base medrash of the Gaon, ultimately Safra Ditzniusa, and he was from his father's side. He was from the Masorah of Lita, and Rav Kook wrote biurim on the Biurei Hagra in Shulchan Aruch, and Rav Kook also at the same point mitzad imo, he was directly descendant of Lubavitcher Chasidus, and as a great-granddaughter of the Tzemach Tzedek, I believe, she received part of the kapata and she sewed it into Rav Kook's kappel and his yarmulke when he was a young boy. And in Europe already he was an Admor. And the Nazir HaKadosh says that ultimately Rav Kook's entire project is just to continue to give us what the Ramchal started. And the Rashash also, if we look at the Haskamos that Rav Kook gave for the Sidurei HaRashash, and so Rav Kook was Malchus, he was Eretz Yisrael kite. It's a klilas yofi. I think it comes from, but there's an amazing book, Kabbalas HaRa'aya from Yosef Avivi. It's a 4-volume masterpiece that shows how ultimately every aspect of Rav Kook's writings are fundamentally and clarifiedly rooted in the Arizal, that he was a Kabbalist. Not to say that that's where it ended. He was something new as well, but it was firmly and fundamentally rooted in Arizal and, of course, Rabbi Nachman. Weiter, Chava, yeah.
Sorry.
No, please, I'm good.
The boundaries.
Mhm.
So I was less asking about the metzius of the boundaries, more.
So I went on that whole tangent because that's
no,
my
No, it was clarifying.
good.
back.
We'll say there.
No, I guess I was asking about the Ratzon too.
So why Hashem built barriers?
No, for the prince to
Yeah.
through off.
The Ratzon is everything. The Ratzon is everything.
But it seems dismissive of the boundaries as a
It's
revelation.
you're moving through them. You're seeing alufo shel olam in them. How does one move through a boundary other than coming to terms with realizing that you're a real boundary, but you're also a revelation of godliness? The infantile desire is to negate boundary. It's to pretend that they don't exist. And the repressed always returns. So we have to work through our stuff, but with the deep confidence that Hashem is the stuff and He's with us and He's the ability to get through the stuff. He's the problem, He's the fixing, He's everything. Yeah, Tzaddik.
It's like seeing some of the Svarim that I've learned, it really does seem like they try to take that mashal as literal as possible. Like when you learn certain pieces in Rabbi Nachman, it really sounds like he's trying to say, like, don't take life, like, don't look at life literally.
Yeah.
When something bad happens and you view it.
Yeah, you have to fight crazy with crazy. You have to be crazy. You have to be crazy. That's the only way is to be kitzoni to a certain degree when it comes to existence.
Take life literally?
It doesn't. Yeah, you take life literally.
Misunderstanding what he's saying, or he's really saying that.
Life is real. There's no denial. Rabbi Nachman saw this world, bless you. Once the tzaddikim worked on the body, right, and you overcame the desires of the body, and you no longer lived like an animal, or you weren't addicted to dopamine like our generation seems to be, or at least I seem to be, so then it was a different thing. Olam hazeh was a different thing. And attachment meant a different thing. And I imagine that the fears of loss of attachment also meant a different thing. And so the attachment to existence and reality has grown and thickened the later on the generations grow. Does that make sense, what I'm saying right now? We feel life more intensely. We attach ourselves to life. We're afraid of disconnecting from things in our lives. We're not living in a place of hapshata and removal from any attachment. We're living in deep bonds, right? Even if we look at simply like the shifts in the role of the male in family structure, right? There's just far more of an engagement. There's far less travel, right? Things have changed. People are connected to families. This worldliness means something more now. So I think it's much more difficult to deny this world. I think for myself, as I understand it, is that the role of Pnimiyas HaTorah is to be in the midst of life, not to escape life. So it's to find the light of godliness within the issue itself rather than denying the issue or even feeling that I have to get over this issue, but rather being able to meet God fundamentally in this place with the deep hidden wink of knowing that this is you, Hashem. The Tzimtzum is the joke, right? Hashem told the joke. The Arizal's name was Yitzchak. The joke is that I am not present. The punchline of the joke is that, guess what? I am present. But Hashem has not told the punchline of the joke yet. And that's why we still say, V'tischak liyom acharon, that the laughter will come about on the last day. Hashem has also placed tzaddikim in the world who know the punchline of the joke, but they're also not allowed to tell the punchline of the joke openly. And so you see it on the grins of the tzaddikim, you see it on the smiles of the tzaddikim, and to a certain hint that in spite of the fact that I can't say out loud that this mitzias zichtach al hadal avonim einon milvado, nevertheless you should know that that's the case.
So did they see through the barriers?
The tzaddikim,
Did they think that reality is not real?
Moshe nigash el arfel ki Hashamu elokim. That the ikar nakuda of Gilui Elokus in this world is that there's nobody who is free from barriers. Now the barrier might be mizuchach betachlis azichuch, right? Like who was it that I think that there was the Heiliger of Menachem Mendel Rimanover, who was seen once running on Rosh Hashanah, I think, and they asked where he was going. He said that he was going to collect the sins that his Rebbe Lechoize threw into Tashlech. Right? So what are the, meaning everyone has their struggles, but it's all erchi, it's all relative to each and every person, not better or worse. Each person is their own mitziyut gamor. Do you hear what I'm saying? It's much more of a delicate middle path where we're not denying reality, nor are we taking reality too seriously. The only way to cope with reality is to laugh at it, to crack it up, to crack up at the seriousness of it. This is a wisdom of people in recovery, as I understand it. Not to take life too seriously, not because life is not serious, but because it's actually too serious to take seriously. As the Heilige Baal HaTanya says, again, from a halachic concept, that when we're measuring things, so there's the measure of a tefach. And a tefach, which is a hand's breadth, actually has two forms of measurement. There's a tefach atzuv and a tefach sameach. There's a sad tefach and a happy tefach. And the Gemara is very unironic about this. They're just like having a halachic conversation. And the measure is that a tefach atzuv is when the fingers are clenched together. And a tefach sameach, or tefach sameach, or soichek, tefach soichek, laughing, is when the fingers are spread apart. Which means what? Which means that laughter and ease and air comes about by way of slackening our grip. Not letting go completely, realizing Hashem wants me to drive my steering wheel. But if I take a little bit of an outward view, I realize that I'm in the child's seat playing with a little tyke steering wheel. B'chulei. Yeah? We have time? What time is it, Chevra?
11:45.
It's late. 5 minutes. Wow, it's late. Yeah, okay. So, B'kitzur, what I want to look at last is, look at the Makoros. Look at the Makoros. Rav Yisrael Sarug. Rav Yisrael Sarug and the Ilamas of Malbush, which means that the first instantiation of the revelation of God was by way of revealing himself by way of letters. And letters are ultimately just points. And all points converge down to a singular most point, the Yud. And the Kuda Pnimis, the Pintel Yid. And meaning to say that Tzimtzum was presence for them. So I want to look at the Leshem. Here. Let's look at these. I actually translated these Leshem, so I'm going to read from the English, but I do read the Leshem, because the Leshem does something else for a person entirely. It's a mikveh tahara. But the Leshem was fundamentally aware of this discrepancy in terms of how we received Tzimtzum and how we understand Tzimtzum. And so first and foremost, it's not Sefer HaKedusha, it's Sefer HaKadosh, which is an acronym for Hakdamus U'Sha'arim. And he says as follows, that Tzimtzum is like air, an empty space within which the totality of the worlds are made and found. And it is therefore referred to as the Avir HaKadmon, the primordial ether. For it is like a void and removed air. The language of the Leshem is Chalal v'Avir Panui. that precedes all existence. However, this space is not actually removed in the aspect of emptiness and absence, heaven forbid, for there is no emptiness whatsoever, as the holy Rav Yosef Gektalia writes in Ginas Egos, that ein rekanut ba'olam. There is nothing empty in the world.
Who's that?
That's the Leshem Shabbat Achlama.
No, Yosef.
Rav Yosef Gektalia was the Sha'arei Ora. He was a Talmud of Rav Avram Abulafia, actually, who becomes really the link in the chain that gives us a real proto shape of what the Arizal was going to reveal. That Sha'arei Ora is an incredibly important introductory sefer, especially the commentary of Beit Shar from Rav Michal Bornstein, who was a Talmud of Rav Moshe Shapiro, where that was one of the first farm that I really dove really deep into. Sha'arei Ora is about the Sfirot, but it's already the intimations of the Partsuf that the Ari is going to bring. And lastly, the Leshem Shuvah Bachlom and Chilek HaBiurim, which is his commentary on Eitz Chaim. We have about 400 pages, and he only got up to, I think, the third or fourth shar of Eitz Chaim. However, regarding the essential power of the Tzimtzum in and of itself, devoid of anything upon which to utilize its power, it is impossible to demarcate anything within it, as it is impossible to stand upon what it is. For in its essence, it negates and it defers all things, meaning it pushes everything else to the side. Its existence and its qualities are like two opposites in a singular entity. This is what the Arizal meant when he stated that the Tzimtzum is void, empty, and removed air. For in truth, no existence can be applied to its essence. However, it is a power that intensifies and connects to all of existence, causing the production of forms of existence and their limit. Since in truth, the Tzimtzum is a power of potency and strength, albeit concealed as revealed above. As described above. The Arizal referred to it as air, avir, for air is not absence as it is known, rather the opposite is true. It is the vitality of all life. We see where we're going, yeah? That the Tzimtzum is the Gilui of life. The Halal, the Emek HaMelech says, is Gematria Chaim. It's Gematria Chaim. The real potency of the Halal is the fact that we look at it and we see it as empty, and there's no bigger Chilul Hashem when we see something as empty. But as the Heilige Balatanya told his son that he heard from his Rebbe in Mezhebush, Lo yisechalel b'shem kadshi, al ta'aseh halal b'shem kadshi. Don't ever come to think that there's actually a halal, because in fact the halal is filled. And our job is to descend down from the original plenitude of infinite light into the apparent emptiness, to refill it, to reveal that it's always already been filled, and to transform what the Emek HaMelech says is the air of Gehenna, that happens once we're kicked out of Gan Eden, and to transform it again into the air of Gan Eden. And then we bring the entirety of existence back to God and say, here, you kicked us out of Gan Eden, and we're bringing back everything that was outside of Gan Eden, and we're showing you that it's Gan Eden also. Be'ezus Hashem. This is the Eitz Chaim. This is the Arizal is a Giloi to give us a taste of the Eitz Chaim, to return back to that place. And it gets mushlam through the Tzadikim Yechidei Hadoros, Nachal Novei Makor Chachma, and Mashiach Tzidkenu, Be'ezus Hashem.